For the entirety of her 20-minute tirade, I remained silent. I simply spread out the property survey, observing as 47 homeowners came to the understanding that they had been utilizing my road without charge. Imagine this: HOA President Patty, positioned at the podium, brandishing a bill for $70,000 for what she called my unauthorized road improvements, and proclaiming to 60 of our neighbors how I was single-handedly tanking their property values. She was armed with a PowerPoint presentation, fabricated engineering reports, and had even retained 3 lawyers to coerce me into submission. This woman had dedicated 6 months to making my life a living hell, from measuring my lawn with a ruler to fining me because my daughter's car was improperly parked within my own driveway. She had even threatened to have my home condemned because I had the audacity to repair dangerous potholes using my own funds. What Patty was unaware of, however, was that every high-end vehicle in that parking lot had traversed my privately owned property to arrive there. The very road that was the source of her great concern was a piece of property I had inherited from my uncle, the man who had developed the entire subdivision. What would your course of action be if your HOA levied a fine against you for the upkeep of your own property? It's a guarantee you have a wild neighbor story of your own. Allow me to rewind and properly introduce myself. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a 52-year-old retired civil engineer who believed he had discovered the ideal quiet neighborhood in which to start over. Following a contentious divorce that made me reevaluate my entire life, I purchased a modest ranch-style house in Willowbrook Estates back in 2019. The main attractions were the quality schools for my teenage daughter Emma's weekend stays, the tree-lined avenues, and what appeared to be a sensible HOA that took care of its responsibilities. Willowbrook Estates is situated like a small haven of suburban aspirations, comprising 47 homes constructed during the 80s and 90s, all linked to the wider world by a single serpentine road named Maple Grove Lane. When I initially settled in, the residents were mostly the original families, middle-class people who had raised their children there and were on a first-name basis with their neighbors. Over the last several years, though, gentrification had begun to take hold, much like ivy climbing a fence. Tech professionals and property investors started acquiring homes, demolishing gardens to put in security cameras, and transforming friendly driveway waves into complaints on the Nextdoor app. Then came Patricia Hendress. Though everyone referred to her as Patty, believe me when I say she possessed all the warmth of a parking citation. At 48 years old, she was a real estate agent who drove a white BMW, which she parked at the exact same angle each day. She was perpetually clad in yoga pants and oversized sunglasses, even when indoors, as if constantly en route to a very significant meeting about her own importance. Patty arrived in the neighborhood in 2020 and promptly designated herself the Neighborhood Standards Coordinator. I am describing a woman who would literally gauge the height of one's grass with an actual ruler. Her spouse, Richard, was some sort of tax lawyer, a reserved man who seemed to dedicate most of his time to apologizing for his wife's conduct. They had no children, which afforded Patty ample time to meddle in everyone else's affairs. The entire conflict began in the spring of 2024. We had endured a harsh winter that had left Maple Grove Lane resembling a lunar surface. The potholes were deep enough to swallow a small dog, with stretches where the asphalt had simply surrendered, deteriorating into gravel. The metallic grating of car undercarriages scraping the pavement became the community's unofficial anthem. As an engineer, I could foresee that the situation was destined to deteriorate. I dispatched a courteous email to the HOA board, volunteering to arrange for professional repairs. Patty's reply arrived in less than an hour. All modifications require board approval and proper permits. 6 weeks passed, and a board meeting had yet to be scheduled. The road's condition continued to worsen. Mrs. Chun, a kind 78-year-old woman living 3 houses away, almost tumbled into a pothole while retrieving her mail. That was the moment I resolved that something had to be done. I contacted my contractor friend, Tom, a man who perpetually smelled of diesel and coffee, and we dedicated a weekend to properly filling the most severe craters. We used high-quality materials, did the correct preparation, the whole 9 yards. It set me back $3,200 of my own money, but at least people could drive without hazard again. The neighbors were immediately appreciative. A number of them offered to pay me back. I shared before and after pictures on our neighborhood Facebook group, hoping it might motivate the board to finally tackle the road issue correctly. This turned out to be my first major error. Within 48 hours, a formal cease and desist letter was in my mailbox. The crisp tear of the certified mail envelope on my porch at 8 a.m. should have been a clear omen. Patty charged me with unauthorized infrastructure modification and threatened legal proceedings. She asserted that my repairs failed to meet HOA aesthetic guidelines and insisted I remove all materials to restore the road to its original condition. Original condition? Did she mean the potholes that were actively dangerous? The neighborhood Facebook group erupted. Longtime residents rallied behind me, recalling an era when neighbors assisted one another. However, the newer, more affluent residents took Patty's side. Rules are rules, they argued. I quickly grasped that I had inadvertently ignited a class-based conflict in our suburban enclave. The aroma of stale coffee at the subsequent emergency HOA meeting should have clued me into what was about to unfold. Patty convened an emergency HOA board meeting for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, a time, of course, when most working individuals are at their jobs. Only 3 of the 5 board members attended, which in Patty's view was sufficient for a quorum. I entered the community center meeting room to find Patty arranged as if she were prosecuting a war crimes tribunal. She had, I'm not exaggerating, a PowerPoint presentation entitled Neighborhood Infrastructure Violations, a Case Study. She had printed photos of my roadwork from every conceivable angle, complete with red arrows indicating what she termed unauthorized modification. This resident, she stated, refusing to use my name, has created serious liability issues and threatens our property values with unsanctioned repairs. She argued my work was not up to community aesthetic standards, a ridiculous claim given that I had used superior materials to those of the original road. The board voted 3-0 to fine me $500 for the unauthorized modifications, with an additional $200 fine for each day until the repairs were professionally undone. Apparently, filling hazardous potholes was a transgression that warranted daily punishment. Here is a small turn of events. I chose to counter with factual evidence. I arrived at the next scheduled board meeting equipped with a comprehensive engineering report, traffic volume data, a safety analysis, and material specifications, the complete works. The room was filled with neighbors, the majority of whom were supportive and weary of navigating craters on their daily commutes. I am offering to donate this work to the HOA, I stated calmly. You only need to accept it retroactively. These repairs surpass county road standards. In response, Patty produced her own engineering report, and this is where the story gets interesting. It was from her brother-in-law, a man whose only professional certifications, it turned out, were in lawn care. His expert assessment was literally printed on landscaping company letterhead. Patty, however, doubled down. She increased my fine to $1,000, plus $500 per day. And here's the real kicker. She implemented a new emergency protocol mandating that all future repairs must use HOA-approved contractors. Can you guess who the sole approved contractor was? It was her husband Richard's golf partner, who charged 3 times the standard rate. My daughter Emma, who is 17 and far more tech-savvy than her old man, assisted me in creating a detailed PowerPoint that exposed the fraudulent engineering report. We presented it at the following meeting, and you could hear a collective gasp from the room as we displayed the landscaper's credentials alongside what Patty had claimed. 3 board members resigned on the spot out of pure embarrassment, but Patty scrambled to enlist replacement board members from her circle of wealthy neighbors, luring them with promises of protecting property values. Within 2 weeks, she had a board composed of her allies, and they intensified their stance on everything. Not only did they maintain the fines, but they also tacked on fraud investigation fees to my bill. It was at this point I realized this conflict was not truly about road repairs. It was about power. It was about a petty individual with a small amount of authority attempting to drive someone out of the neighborhood for daring to challenge her rule. Other neighbors began approaching me in private, recounting their own horror stories. Patty had cited people for using the wrong shade of beige paint, measured fence heights with a tape measure, and fined an elderly veteran for flying his American flag past sunset. This woman was intoxicated with authority, and I had unintentionally become the figurehead of resistance against her little suburban tyranny. Here is some information I learned that could be useful if you find yourself in a similar predicament. HOAs can demand that you post a bond equivalent to the disputed fine amount if you wish to contest it. This is a legal maneuver intended to bankrupt individuals into submission before they even get a chance to fight. Always investigate your state's HOA dispute resolution procedures before entering into a protracted battle. Understanding the financial obligations up front can prevent unpleasant surprises. At this stage, I was contending with $3,000 in fines, a sum that was increasing by $500 daily. The scent of fresh tar from my roadwork had long dissipated, supplanted by the bitter taste of injustice each time I drove over the smooth surfaces I had created. But here is what Patty failed to realize. I am an engineer. We don't just fix problems. We resolve them in a systematic manner. And I was about to commence some very methodical research into who precisely held the authority to do what in our small neighborhood, because an element of this whole affair just wasn't adding up. When an engineer becomes curious about property records and legal documents, well, let's just say matters tend to get compelling. Patty's campaign of harassment escalated significantly. She began driving by my house several times a day in her white BMW, decelerating to capture photographs of my property like some sort of suburban private eye. The software of her car window lowering became my personal soundtrack of impending dread. She cited me for grass that slightly surpassed the 3.5-inch maximum. Yes, she actually got down on her hands and knees with a ruler. She fined me because Emma's car was parked improperly in my own driveway, apparently because it was 6 inches over an invisible line only she could perceive. She then reported me to the county for potential unpermitted driveway modifications, despite the fact I hadn't altered my driveway in 5 years. However, I am not the type to passively accept harassment. I had security cameras installed and began to document every incident. That is when I uncovered something remarkable: selective enforcement. Patty's affluent friends had identical violations that she completely overlooked: incorrect paint shades, oversized mailboxes, cars parked in the exact same manner as Emma's. I constructed a spreadsheet, a tool beloved by engineers, illustrating the clear pattern of bias. It was then that Mrs. Chen appeared at my door one evening, bearing homemade cookies that smelled of vanilla and fortitude. She had been observing the entire situation develop, and she had information to share. "Patty tried to force me to remove my rose garden," she said softly. "The one my husband planted 30 years ago before he passed. She claimed it was a non-native species and created an excessive maintenance burden." Mrs. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she recounted the story. "But I still possess all the original HOA documents from when we first moved in. Would you be interested in seeing them?" Here is the small detail that altered the course of everything. Mrs. Chen's late husband had been one of the original founding members of the HOA. She possessed copies of every covenant, every amendment, and every set of board meeting minutes dating back to 1983. As I laid those documents out across my kitchen table, I understood that the majority of Patty's current regulations had never been properly ratified. The original HOA was, in fact, quite reasonable, focusing on basic matters like preventing one's yard from becoming a junkyard and maintaining quiet after 10 p.m. All these nitpicky rules about grass height and paint colors had been added piecemeal by various boards over the years, many without the required community approval. But my investigation had to go deeper. I dedicated the following weekend to the county recorder's office, tracing property records and utility easements. The musty aroma of old books and bureaucracy became my scent for about 10 hours straight. It was there that I discovered something noteworthy about our subdivision's development history. The initial developer had kept ownership of several crucial parcels when the neighborhood was first constructed. Most were sold off over time, but the road, Maple Grove Lane, had a more intricate past. When the original developer's company went bankrupt in 1995, its assets were liquidated at auction to satisfy creditors. The road's ownership was transferred to a holding company I had never heard of. That holding company was dissolved in 2001, and its assets were passed to, well, this is where it gets interesting, Morrison Development LLC. The same surname as mine. The same surname as my Uncle Bob, who had been a small-scale property investor before his death in 2018. I hurried home and began to sift through the boxes of paperwork Uncle Bob had bequeathed to me, documents I had intended to organize but had never gotten around to. Within that pile of yellowed papers and musty folders, there had to be a deed that would change the entire situation. Meanwhile, Patty was intensifying her campaign. My fines had reached $8,500 and were still climbing daily. She threatened to put a lien on my house and arranged a neighborhood standards hearing with county officials. Her strategy was transparent: either bankrupt me into compliance or have my property condemned. But while she was engineering my downfall, I was experiencing the most significant holy crap moment of my adult life. Tucked away in Uncle Bob's estate documents was a deed for the Maple Grove Lane private roadway easement. Every single vehicle that entered our neighborhood, including Patty's cherished BMW, was driving across property that I had inherited. Here's a piece of knowledge that might surprise you. Private road easements operate entirely differently from public rights-of-way. When you are the owner of a private road, you can actually manage who uses it, establish maintenance standards, and even impose fees. It is always wise to research actual property boundaries and easements before making assumptions that roads are public. Many subdivisions have unexpected private ownership arrangements that can completely alter your legal position. I sat in my kitchen that night, holding the deed with hands that shook from a mix of astonishment and righteous anger. Patty had been fining me for maintaining my own damn road. First thing the next morning, I contacted a real estate attorney. I needed professional confirmation of what I was seeing, as it seemed too good to be true. 2 days later, seated in her office that smelled of leather-bound legal texts and high-end coffee, I received the validation that set my heart racing. Mr. Morrison, you are unequivocally the owner of that road. The chain of title is unambiguous, and you have been legally responsible for its upkeep all along. The HOA never possessed any authority to regulate it. But here is what I refrained from doing. I did not immediately march to Patty's house and brandish the deed in her face. This was because Patty was on the verge of providing me with something far more satisfying than a swift victory. She was about to hang herself with her own rope. She increased my total fines to $25,000 and called an emergency community meeting to address the problem resident. She even extended an invitation to the local TV news crew to report on what she framed as a neighborhood dispute. This woman genuinely believed that the presence of cameras would bolster her position. The meeting was overflowing. More than 40 neighbors were present, in addition to the Channel 7 news team with their bright lights, which gave the proceedings the feel of a small-town congressional hearing. Patty had prepared a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation on maintaining community standards, featuring enlarged photos of my roadwork labeled as unauthorized modification. This resident's defiance threatens everyone's property values, she proclaimed to the cameras, gesturing toward me as if I were a common felon. We need community support for necessary enforcement action. I remained seated quietly in the back row, taking notes and allowing her to dig her own hole deeper. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly uncomfortable. The tension was palpable in the way people shifted in their plastic chairs and averted their gaze. Here is the small detail that changed the course of events. Instead of defending myself, I requested permission to respond to her allegations. Patty, likely anticipating some form of broken apology, smugly consented. I proceeded to the front of the room, carrying a folder of documents, and unfolded a surveyor's map on the table. The room fell completely silent, save for the hum of the news camera. Before we delve into road violations, I stated calmly, let's first establish who actually owns the road. The look on Patty's face when I presented the deed was invaluable. It was pure shock, as if someone had just informed her that Santa Claus was real and was suing her for trespassing. I laid out everything clearly. I had inherited the road from my Uncle Bob. Every resident had been using my private property for access, and I had been maintaining their route at my own expense for years. The county official who was in attendance asked to review the documents and confirmed they appeared authentic. The HOA never had the authority to regulate my private road, I went on. I've been subsidizing this neighborhood's infrastructure while being fined for improving my own property. Patty's desperate retort was to allege the documents were fraudulent or immaterial. She maintained the HOA had established authority and threatened to have the county investigate me for fraud. But it was clear in her eyes that she understood the game had just been completely altered. The reasonable neighbors grasped the implications immediately. Several came up to me afterward, expressing their gratitude for my upkeep of the road and apologizing for not speaking out during the harassment campaign. About 15 residents departed with Patty, but the majority remained to hear my proposal. I am proposing a Maple Grove Road cooperative agreement, I announced. Residents would pay a modest monthly fee for professional maintenance. I would retain ownership but commit to community input. We would end the current fines and legal threats, and everyone would benefit from a properly maintained road. Patty refused to entertain any form of compromise. She stormed out, shouting that this was not over and threatening to sue me for blackmail. Her core group of supporters trailed behind her, but Mrs. Chun promptly stepped forward to arrange an informational meeting for interested residents. The local news broadcast the story that evening. HOA road ownership dispute reveals private property rights. The video clip went viral on social media, with comments overwhelmingly in my favor. Patty's threats and conduct made her appear entirely unreasonable when contrasted with my calm, fact-based presentation. Here is another piece of information that saved me thousands in legal expenses. HOAs cannot enforce liens on their own without obtaining actual court judgments. Many HOA threats are legally empty bluffs aimed at intimidating homeowners who are unaware of their rights. If your HOA threatens you with a lien, insist on seeing the actual court orders. Many associations depend on fear tactics rather than legitimate legal power. I gave the community a week to consider my proposal. Within 3 days, I had received calls from more than 20 interested neighbors. Mrs. Chun organized a road cooperative informational meeting, while Patty held a rival defense strategy meeting with her remaining followers. The battle lines had been drawn, but for the first time since this ordeal began, I was holding all the cards. But owning the road was merely the beginning. When I truly delved into Uncle Bob's paperwork, spread everything across my dining room table like some kind of property detective, I uncovered something that made the road ownership seem like a minor issue. Uncle Bob hadn't just been the owner of the road. His company, Morrison Development LLC, had originally developed the entire Willowbrook Estates subdivision back in the 1980s. Every single lot, every utility easement, every meticulously planned curve in our little suburban haven. Uncle Bob had designed it all. The road was not just private property. It had been specifically engineered as a private access point to enhance the value of every lot in the neighborhood. It was never meant to be public or under HOA control. Uncle Bob had intentionally retained ownership for both liability protection and to uphold quality standards. My real estate attorney detailed the full extent of what I had inherited. As the road's owner, I could legally manage access, establish rules for its use, and even charge fees for maintenance. The sole constraint was that I could not abruptly leave existing residents stranded without providing reasonable notice. But essentially, I possessed unlimited authority over my own property. Here is the financial reality that astonished me. Over a period of 30 years, road maintenance had amounted to approximately $180,000. My recent $3,200 repair work had boosted property values by an estimated $15,000 for each home. By simple calculation, the neighborhood's 47 homes had collectively gained over $700,000 in value from my work alone. Mrs. Chun provided the historical context that made everything fall into place. The original HOA had been genuinely collaborative, centered on basic community upkeep and neighborly relations. Uncle Bob used to coordinate road work through HOA channels, and everyone contributed their fair share. Your uncle was a good man, Mrs. Chun informed me over tea that tasted of jasmine and justice. He never made anyone feel indebted to him, even though legally they were. Patty's regime was effectively a hostile takeover of what was once a genuine community. The shift in my mindset was like flipping on floodlights. I had been viewing this situation entirely incorrectly. I wasn't a resident bound by HOA rules concerning the road. I was a property owner whose asset was being regulated by his customers. Those 47 homes were completely reliant on my private road for access, and I had been too courteous to acknowledge my leverage. But here is what truly troubled me. I had been subsidizing these people's infrastructure while they were fining me for the privilege. The HOA budget showed zero funds allocated for road maintenance because they had been freeloading on my inheritance for years. I made a strategic choice that night. I could have gone nuclear right away, posted private road, no trespassing signs, and restricted access until people paid up. But that is not who I am. I aim to resolve this issue fairly, not to destroy the neighborhood out of vengeance. My plan was straightforward. educate the community on the true ownership structure, propose a reasonable compromise, and only escalate to access restrictions if the harassment persisted. This was about respect and fairness, not revenge. I hired a professional surveyor to mark the precise road boundaries and ordered appropriate signage indicating its private road status. I investigated the insurance implications and consulted with a traffic lawyer about correct procedures. If I was going to handle this, I was going to do it properly. The emotional turning point for me was the realization that I could actually shield other neighbors from Patty's tyranny. Mrs. Chin's rose garden, the veteran's flag, all the petty harassment. I had the capacity to stop it by ending Patty's authority over the road that sustained her little kingdom. I transformed from a defensive victim into an empowered property owner. But with great power comes great responsibility, and I was committed to using this leverage judiciously. The following week felt like preparing for the most critical presentation of my life. My attorney guided me through every aspect of a private road owner's rights and duties. I could legally install signage, regulate hours of use, restrict certain types of vehicles, and levy maintenance fees. The limitation was that I had to grant reasonable access to current residents and could not suddenly leave people stranded without proper legal notification. I engaged a professional surveyor to verify the exact boundaries. Every inch was crucial if this were to end up in court. Watching him operate his precise electronic equipment, with its beeps and measurements, while neighbors feigned indifference from their windows, felt like drawing battle lines with scientific accuracy. The traffic engineer I brought in calculated fair usage fees based on actual vehicle counts. He positioned himself at the road's entrance for 3 days, clicking a handheld counter each time a car went by. The metallic click, click, click became the soundtrack of my data collection. His finding, $50 per month per household, would amply cover professional maintenance, snow removal, and emergency repairs. Emma evolved into my secret weapon for community engagement. She established a neighborhood Facebook group named Fair HOA Governance and began to chronicle the timeline of harassment with photos and screenshots. My daughter has a talent for making complex legal matters sound perfectly reasonable, and her posts started to attract supporters I hadn't even known existed. "Dad, check this out," she said, showing me her laptop screen filled with comments. "Mrs. Peterson says Patty fined her for having the wrong mailbox numbers. Mr. Garcia got cited for his kids' chalk drawings on his own driveway. This woman is unhinged." I crafted an educational presentation that detailed the road's ownership history, complete with maps, photos, and a simple FAQ. My background in engineering was invaluable. I knew how to make technical data accessible. The crucial part was demonstrating to people that this wasn't about money or retribution. It was about halting the harassment and establishing a sustainable solution. The financial breakdown was revealing. I figured that over the years, I had essentially subsidized the neighborhood's infrastructure to the tune of about $150 per household per month. My proposed $50 fee was, in fact, a great deal compared to typical HOA road assessments. Mrs. Chun connected me with other longtime residents who had been quietly enduring Patty's rule. Tom, the contractor, volunteered to donate materials and labor if necessary. The attorney offered ongoing advice on legal protocols. Even the traffic engineer agreed to testify about professional road standards if it came to that. My contingency plan accounted for every scenario I could foresee. If education proved ineffective, I would escalate to formal usage agreements. If the harassment persisted, I would limit access during certain hours. If legal threats continued, I would file a countersuit for harassment and defamation. The ultimate option, complete access restriction, was legally feasible but would require careful planning with emergency services. Here is a piece of knowledge that could save you money if you ever have to deal with shared infrastructure. Private road maintenance cooperatives can actually offer tax benefits through proper organization. The costs of shared infrastructure may be eligible for certain business deductions if structured correctly. When handling private road conflicts, look into cooperative ownership models and their tax implications. Sometimes, financial incentives can foster better solutions than legal threats. The timing of my strategy was critical. I chose to wait for Patty's next move before playing my full hand. This would amplify the impact and present the community with a clear choice between her authoritarian methods and my cooperative approach. I rehearsed maintaining my composure under pressure, anticipating that Patty would likely have an explosive response. My aim was to concentrate on solutions, not on assigning blame, and to give the community a genuine opportunity to opt for cooperation over conflict. The psychological groundwork was as vital as the legal preparations. I had to come to terms with the fact that a certain degree of conflict was inevitable. Patty had constructed her entire neighborhood persona around controlling others, and she would not relinquish that power readily. But I also readied myself for the possibility that this could heal the community. If we could create a fair, transparent system for road maintenance, it could serve as a model for managing other shared costs. Perhaps we could even revive some of the neighborly cooperation that Mrs. Chun fondly remembered from the early days. The surveyor completed his work on a Thursday, placing small flags every 50 feet along the road's boundaries. The sharp odor of spray paint marking property lines mingled with the fragrance of honeysuckle from Mrs. Chin's garden, a peculiar blend of legal exactitude and natural beauty. By Friday morning, I had professional signs prepared for installation: private road, Morrison Development LLC owner, authorized access only, usage agreements required. But I delayed putting them up. I wanted to give diplomacy one final opportunity. Because sometimes, when you hold all the cards, the most strategic move is to let your adversary make the next mistake. Patty made that mistake sooner than I had anticipated. On Monday morning, I discovered a sheriff's sale notice affixed to my front door, a thick, legal-sized document that crinkled ominously in the morning air. She was actually attempting to force the sale of my home to settle her fictitious fines. But here is where her hubris truly became apparent. She contacted the local news station to declare her victory over the problem resident and arranged a press conference to announce her successful enforcement action. This woman was so intoxicated by her perceived authority that she was broadcasting her overreach to the entire county. I made no public statements. I just continued with my daily routine, allowing Patty to dig her own hole deeper while I quietly readied the ultimate option. My attorney filed a motion to have the lien dismissed. As it turns out, you cannot simply declare debts and compel property sales without actual court judgments. But I kept that victory to myself for the time being. The professional survey stakes were still in place along the road's boundaries, like small flags of impending doom. I had the private road signs stored in my garage, but I wanted Patty to fully commit to her destructive path before I revealed my trump card. Meanwhile, the community was becoming fractured. Several neighbors approached me privately, offering apologies and sharing their own horror stories. Mr. Garcia informed me that Patty had threatened to fine him because his children were drawing with chalk on their own driveway. Mrs. Peterson was cited for having the wrong style of mailbox numbers, even though they had been there for 15 years. "She's completely lost it," Mrs. Peterson whispered to me at the grocery store, glancing around as if Patty might be concealed behind the cereal boxes. But we're all too afraid to speak up because she retaliates against anyone who defies her. Here is the small detail that revealed just how desperate Patty was becoming. Through Emma's social media sleuthing, I learned that Patty's husband, Richard, was under an ethics investigation. His law practice was being accused of overcharging HOA clients and engaging in potential kickback arrangements with preferred contractors. Patty was leveraging her HOA presidency to funnel business to Richard's firm, creating a massive conflict of interest. The same emergency protocols that mandated expensive, approved contractors? Richard was receiving legal fees from those very companies. The inflated fines and legal threats meant more billable hours for his practice. But I held on to this information. Sometimes, the most potent weapon is the one you choose not to deploy yet. Patty's media campaign backfired spectacularly. Her interview about maintaining community standards made her appear petty and vindictive, especially when she claimed I was a threat to property values while standing next to the beautifully maintained road I had fixed at my own expense. Local small business owners began contacting me with their support. They had faced similar petty abuses of authority from city councils and permit offices. Tom, the contractor, offered to organize other tradespeople to assist with road maintenance. A local restaurant owner volunteered to cater the next community meeting for free. The social media battle was also intensifying. Emma's Fair HOA Governance group had grown to over 200 members, including people from other neighborhoods who shared their own HOA horror stories. Patty's supporters established a rival property standards protection group, but their posts only made them seem more unreasonable. That is when Patty committed her gravest error yet. She initiated a petition to remove the problem resident and began circulating rumors about my personal life and finances. She told people I was likely laundering money through fraudulent road repairs and implied I was behind on my mortgage payments. This whisper campaign was the final straw. When you attack someone's character with falsehoods, you cross the line from petty harassment to something far more serious. I made my decision. On Friday evening, I sent a concise email to every household in the neighborhood. Community meeting, Sunday, 2 p.m. Important information regarding road ownership. No further details, no threats, just a calm invitation to learn the truth. Patty responded by scheduling her own competing meeting for the same time, labeling it an emergency action against problem resident. She even invited county officials and the local media, with the clear intention of having me publicly humiliated and possibly arrested on whatever charges she could invent. The stage was set for the final confrontation. I had my attorney on standby, the surveyor prepared with boundary documentation, and a folder brimming with evidence of Patty's harassment campaign and her husband's ethics problems. But most crucially, I had the road ownership deed in my briefcase, along with professional signs ready to be installed the moment I decided to end this charade. Sunday was poised to be very interesting. And this time, I was not going to let Patty control the narrative. Sunday dawned with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel faded. Both meetings were set for 2 p.m. at the community center. Patty's emergency action against problem resident versus my simple, important information about road ownership. I showed up 30 minutes early with my attorney, the surveyor, and a briefcase filled with documents. The parking lot was already teeming with cars, and I could see neighbors taking sides by which entrance they chose. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a surveyor's stake. Patty had gone for full melodrama. She had arranged for a projector, invited the Channel 7 News crew once more, and somehow persuaded a county code enforcement officer and a sheriff's deputy to be present. Her strategy was clearly to have me arrested, or at the very least, publicly disgraced on live television. The room was filled to capacity, with over 60 people, the largest assembly in the neighborhood's history. Patty had seized the podium and was already in full performance mode by the time I entered. She had put together another PowerPoint, this one titled, "Protecting Our Community from Fraudulent Residents." For 20 minutes, she railed against my unauthorized road modifications, displayed enlarged photos of my work, and asserted that my defiance was jeopardizing everyone's property values. She even brought props, a ruler for measuring grass height, and printed copies of the fabricated violations she had concocted. "This resident," she proclaimed, pointing directly at me as if I were a war criminal, "has demonstrated a complete disregard for our community's standards. Today, we will vote to ban him from all common areas and to pursue criminal charges for fraud and property destruction." The applause that followed was sparse and uneasy. You could sense the mood in the room shifting as people began to see how unhinged the situation had become. When Patty finally concluded her theatrical display, she smugly offered me an opportunity to respond, likely anticipating some sort of desperate appeal for mercy. Instead, I rose calmly, walked to the front of the room, and placed my surveyor's boundary map on the table for everyone to see. "Before we get into a discussion about road violations," I said, my voice resonating clearly through the silent room, "let's first clarify who actually owns the road we're talking about." That was the small twist that brought everything to an end. I unfolded the original development deed and the inheritance documents, demonstrating how Maple Grove Lane had never been public property. Every single resident, Patty included, had been using my private road for access without permission or compensation. I inherited this road from my uncle, who developed this entire subdivision in the 1980s. For the last 5 years, I have been maintaining your access route at my own expense, all while being fined for improving my own property. The county official requested to inspect the documents. The surveyor verified the boundaries. The sheriff's deputy looked increasingly uncomfortable as he grasped that Patty had summoned him to a civil property dispute that was entirely beyond his jurisdiction. Patty's reaction was one of pure desperation. She alleged that my documents were fabricated, that I was perpetrating some kind of elaborate scam, and that the county must investigate me for fraud. But you could see in her eyes that she knew the game was up. I presented my reasonable solution one last time. a road cooperative where residents would pay modest monthly fees for professional maintenance. I would keep ownership but commit to seeking community input. It was fair, transparent, and advantageous for everyone. Patty's breakdown was nothing short of spectacular. She rejected any compromise, shouting that I was blackmailing the community and threatening to sue anyone who cooperated with my extortion scheme. She actually used the word extortion to describe asking people to help pay for the upkeep of the road they used daily. When she saw that the room wasn't swayed by her hysterics, she stormed out with her core supporters, yelling, "This isn't over," and threatening to expose this fraud to the state attorney general. The sound of the door slamming behind her reverberated through the now quiet room like the end of a very long, very foolish war. Mrs. Chun immediately stood up and began to organize the reasonable neighbors who wished to discuss the cooperative proposal. Approximately 35 households showed serious interest. The county official confirmed that everything seemed legally sound and recommended we sort out the details privately. The news crew interviewed both sides afterward. Patty's on-camera rant about fraudulent residents and property theft made her look completely unhinged, while my calm explanation of the inheritance and a reasonable cost-sharing plan came across as entirely sensible. That evening, the story went viral on local social media. The comments were overwhelmingly in favor of my position, with dozens of people sharing their own HOA horror stories and commending me for finding a fair solution. But the true victory was stepping outside after the meeting and seeing neighbors actually talking to each other again, instead of hiding behind curtains and avoiding eye contact. For the first time in months, Willowbrook Estates felt like a community instead of a war zone. I had thought the Sunday meeting marked the end, but Patty had one final move. She issued a deadline of Friday at 5 p.m., demanding I cease all fraudulent claims or face the full force of legal action. Her strategy was to rally her last remaining supporters for a final showdown. On Friday evening, I arrived at the community center parking lot accompanied by my attorney, the surveyor, and a stack of professional private road, Morrison Development LLC signs, ready for installation. The setting sun cast long shadows across the asphalt as both groups gathered for what everyone understood would be the ultimate confrontation. Patty had arranged what she termed a Save Our Neighborhood rally. Her supporters brandished handmade signs with slogans like "Stop the Road Bully" and "Protect Our Rights." She had brought her husband, Richard, and 3 of his lawyer associates, clearly intending to intimidate me into submission through sheer legal might. The Channel 7 news crew was present again, along with a reporter from the county newspaper who had caught wind of the viral HOA conflict. A sheriff's deputy was on hand to keep the peace, though he looked as if he would rather be anywhere else dealing with actual crime. Mrs. Chun, bless her heart, came forward to mediate the discussion, acting as our neighborhood's unofficial elder stateswoman. The scent of her jasmine perfume mingled with the autumn air and the nervous tension of about 50 neighbors. I laid out my road cooperative proposal one last time. $50 per month per household for professional maintenance, transparent bookkeeping, community input on major decisions, and a 5-year rate guarantee. In comparison to typical HOA road assessments, it was a veritable bargain. Patty's counteroffensive was pure theatrics. She contended that my ownership was merely a legal formality and that the community had established rights through decades of use. Her voice grew higher and more shrill as she insisted I was attempting to steal their road and extort honest families. "This man," she shrieked, pointing at me as if I were some kind of monster, "is holding our entire neighborhood hostage. He's demanding we pay him for the privilege of driving to our own homes." It was then that Tom, the contractor, stepped forward and delivered a perfect dose of reality. He detailed the true costs of road maintenance, displayed photos of the road's condition before my repairs, and calculated how much money I had personally saved everyone over the years. "Jake's been subsidizing this whole neighborhood," Tom declared, his voice carrying the weight of someone who genuinely knows construction. "That road would have cost us 50 grand to fix properly. He did it for 3 grand and asked for nothing in return." I made my final offer, lowering the fee to $40 per month and including winter snow removal. "I'm giving everyone until Sunday to decide. After that, I will be installing private road signage and requiring usage agreements for all vehicles." That's when Patty played her ultimate card. She announced that if anyone signed my extortion contract, She would personally sue them for conspiracy to commit fraud. She claimed she had discovered a way to construct an alternate access road and that residents had no need for my criminal highway. The county official, who had been observing quietly, finally intervened. "Ma'am, there are no available easements for an alternate access. The surrounding properties are privately owned with no right-of-way provisions. The cost would exceed $2 million, plus environmental permits, and it would take 3 to 5 years at a minimum." Patty's face cycled through about 6 different shades of red as she grasped that her bluff had been publicly called on camera. "I don't care what it costs," she screamed. "We will not be held hostage by this fraud." It was at that moment I delivered my mic drop line. "Mrs. Hendress," I said calmly, "you've spent 6 months fining me for maintaining my own property while your husband's law firm collected fees from every HOA enforcement action. You've harassed elderly residents, targeted families with children, and turned this neighborhood into a war zone. The only fraud here is your abuse of power." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the news cameras seemed to zoom in more intently. "I'm offering a fair solution that benefits everyone. But if you prefer to build a $2 million road to avoid paying $40 a month, that's your choice. Just remember, you'll still need to cross my property to get to your construction site." The informal vote was swift and conclusive. 35 households endorsed the cooperative agreement, 8 were undecided, and only Patty's core group of 6 households rejected it entirely. On Saturday morning, I installed the professional signage: "Private road, authorized access only." The signs were posted at both ends of Maple Grove Lane with a notice of a 30-day grace period for current residents to finalize their usage agreements. Patty attempted one last, desperate move by organizing neighbors to take down the signs and calling the police to report vandalism of public property. The responding sheriff's deputy took one look at my ownership documents and politely informed Patty that I had every legal right to mark my own property. The media coverage that weekend portrayed a calm, reasonable property owner proposing fair solutions versus a hysterical woman demanding impossible outcomes. Public opinion was not even a contest. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates is a completely transformed place. The Maple Grove Road Cooperative is officially incorporated, with 37 participating households paying their monthly fees via a simple online portal. The road has never been in better condition, boasting professional maintenance, proper drainage, and even decorative plantings along the verges. Patty's reign of terror concluded just as one might expect. She was voted out of the HOA presidency in an emergency election 3 weeks after our confrontation. It turns out that when people are no longer afraid of reprisal, they vote for common sense. Her husband Richard's law practice went under after the county ethics investigation uncovered systematic overcharging and kickback schemes. The family quietly put their house up for sale within 6 months and relocated to another state. The ripple effects have been astonishing. I get emails from homeowners all over the country who are dealing with similar HOA abuses, all seeking guidance on how to fight back. The local news ran a follow-up story on HOA reform, and the county is now seriously considering new oversight requirements for community associations. Our case has been cited in 3 different property rights lawsuits as a model for how private road cooperatives can succeed. But the most meaningful victory is seeing Mrs. Chin's rose garden in full bloom once more. Free from the fear of citation letters, she has organized a neighborhood welcome committee that genuinely welcomes new residents instead of terrorizing them. Our annual road maintenance meeting has transformed into a community social gathering where people plan block parties and arrange babysitting cooperatives. Property values have risen by an average of $12,000 per home since we implemented professional road maintenance. The road cooperative has amassed a healthy reserve fund for future repairs. Everyone is saving money compared to typical HOA assessments, and we have transparent accounting instead of enigmatic administrative fees. The psychological shift in the neighborhood is even more remarkable than the financial gains. People wave to each other again. Children play in the street without their parents worrying about violation notices. The Facebook group Emma started has blossomed into a platform for genuine community organizing for positive initiatives. I never set out to be a community activist. This entire ordeal taught me that sometimes ordinary individuals must stand up to bullies, even when it is uncomfortable. I learned the value of documentation, patience, and forming alliances. Most importantly, I found that principled opposition can bring about positive change when you are fighting for something larger than yourself. We have established the Fair HOA Advocacy Fund using some of the cooperative's surplus funds. It offers legal resources to homeowners facing abuse and collaborates with the local legal aid society to conduct educational workshops on property rights. 3 nearby communities have adopted similar cooperative models after witnessing our success. The legal precedent we established has helped resolve other private road disputes through mediation rather than costly litigation. The local government has revised its subdivision regulations to mandate clearer disclosure of private road ownership. Even HOA management companies have started to prioritize transparency and resident rights in their training materials. But my favorite result is watching Emma, now a college freshman studying public policy, apply this experience to her coursework on grassroots organizing and community development. She has authored papers on how ordinary citizens can effectively challenge institutional abuse, and she credits our road war with inspiring her career ambitions. Last week, I received a call from a homeowner in the next county who is facing a similar issue. A pool maintenance company monopoly where HOA board members receive kickbacks from overpriced contracts. Residents are being hit with huge special assessments while board members profit. I am meeting with them next weekend to share our documentation strategies and cooperative model. The annual road maintenance meeting is next month, and Mrs. Chun is organizing a neighborhood potluck to accompany it. Tom the contractor is donating materials for some decorative stonework at the entrance. The cooperative voted to add bicycle lanes and improved lighting. We are planning a small festival in the fall to commemorate our 2nd anniversary. This is what community truly looks like when people opt for cooperation over control, transparency over corruption, and fairness over fear. So here is my challenge to you. If you are contending with HOA abuse, petty authoritarians, or any circumstance where someone is using a small measure of power to make your life miserable, fight back. Document everything. Know your rights, form alliances, and do not let bullies triumph through intimidation. Sometimes the most effective response is simply refusing to be a victim.